the reality. Like comics are not for just for kids, they're for everyone.
Yeah.
But because they were that way for so long, the common perception of them is that still. And so it's exciting to see how much things are changing on a certain level. We don't know where it's going. That can be a good thing for certain people. That's a terrifying thing because, there are certain people who just want to make comics great again. But I think the more varied the stories we see, the more powerful it is. There will be more ways for people to connect, and the more people that are reading comics, the better, in my opinion. Hi, I'm Lyndon Radchenka, creator, writer, and letterer of The Laundrymen, Blood of the Saucermen, and the original book, The Laundrymen, The Life Thief. You can find me at infinitestudio.ca, or I'm on Blue Sky, Instagram, or sometimes, occasionally, Twitter, which I guess is now known as X. You're listening and watching to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by a fellow Canadian. He has not been on the show in a couple of years. It has been, I'm guessing, 2022, something along that line, when he and his very talented artist were on the show talking about the Laundrymen. But this time around, we're joined by the writer, and they're both co-creators of the Laundrymen. We're joined by the ever-talented Lyndon Radchenka. How are you doing today?
I'm doing so great. It's so nice to see you again, Kurt.
No.
I think the last time we spoke was almost exactly 3 years ago.
Oh, jeez.
In 2023, we
Yeah.
were gearing up for our first Kickstarter campaign for The Laundrymen, The Life Thief. Now I'm back here to talk about book two in that series, which is Laundrymen, Blood of the Saucermen. Last time it was Stephen Kaul and I, who's the artist on that series, who were here to chat with you, and this time it's just me.
Well, for those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, never watched the first interview with you guys on this particular show of Two Geeks Talking. Tell us who you are and what you're bringing this time around.
Right, yeah. So I'm here to talk about Stephen and I's creator-owned comic series, The Laundrymen. Last time I was here, Kurt, I don't know if you remember, we had such a great
Mhm.
conversation that one of your quotes actually ended
Yes.
up in our printed book for our blurbs. So I was so excited to come back and talk to you about book two. Essentially, what the series is, two monster hunters who work out of a laundromat and they solve supernatural mysteries. And we're building this world and this series in a way that each volume that we make is sort of a standalone case file for the Laundrymen, so that anyone who's discovering us can jump in at any point in the series.
And I think it's wonderful to see because you get that feel with like there's comics out there like Dime Store Detective from John Dexter and a few others where you got that pulp style, gritty, back to the 80s style of
Totally.
of Monster Hunters with hints of supernatural and all this other fun stuff because between your writing and Steve's amazing artwork, you get immersed in the world very easily and very quickly, no matter what issue you're reading. And in reading issue two, I loved the path that you're going on with the characters. You're used to seeing them together, but seeing them separated. I'm not spoiling anything.
We can get into spoilers all we want on this show. I'm totally happy with that. Our first book, yeah, was the first case file where our main characters Brian and Wade are together and they're investigating this murder mystery in a small town. And I highly recommend that anyone go check out our previous conversation on that. But this one, we separate them for almost the whole book, and we're caught in the middle of this gang war between aliens and vampires, which is this like schlocky 80s actiony vibe. And what it really is about these two characters finding their way back to each other and what they'll do for their friendship.
I definitely for sure, and it's a ride from page one till the final page, and I can't wait to see what book three is. Currently, have a Kickstarter campaign going on for it right now.
Yeah.
Here, love seeing that here. You guys have been doing really well in terms of tiers and in terms of promotion and things like that. I love seeing you guys on the various podcasts and shows there too. But when you look at where comics are right now, from a creative standpoint and from a business standpoint, what do you feel that's fundamentally different from, say, 5 years ago? And what still feels exactly the same under the surface?
Yeah, it's a big question. I take a lot of guidance from someone that I consider to be Fortunately, one of my teachers and mentors in comics, who's Scott Snyder, and I don't know if we spoke about him last time I was on the show now, but essentially he's really spearheading this new not movement in comics, but there's this real strong vibe right now of storytelling and reimagining concepts. And a lot of it, the stories are bigger and they're more bombastic than ever. And there's really an effort towards giving readers as much value in their books as as you possibly can, and finding ways to excite people and talk about what's currently going on in the world in new and exciting ways. And we talk about the market and how much it's contracted in the last years. If we think 5 years ago, in 2021, we were in I would say, the second half of the pandemic, and for a long time there, what we were dealing with was lots of indie publishers that were growing and expanding quickly because there were people that were spending more money than ever before on recapturing their childhood and um, all of the various streaming booms that were going on at that time and sort of the IP gathering that was going on. And a lot of that's really faded in the last little while here. And so what we're left with is this like super concentrated competitive comics market. And it's really hard right now to break through. I've heard from colleagues of mine who are on Kickstarter that there's never been more comics on Kickstarter than there are right now. Kickstarter is one of the largest, if not the largest, publisher of comics in the last couple of years. And so it's a really exciting, scary, and difficult market. But Stephen and I have been working so hard on this book in the last 3 years, and I'm really just here to talk about what a great job he's done on this book and how amazing the art has turned out. We can't wait to have the book in our hands, and we're really hoping that anyone who's new to Kickstarter will see that we fulfilled the first campaign, and very quickly, like I think within the campaign ending, our books shipped within 2 months type thing. The book is essentially done now. Steven's coloring it, but as you've seen, Kurt, the artwork is done. You can read the complete story. And our hope is that that track record is going to give anyone who didn't join us the first time the confidence to hop on board on this one and continue on the ride of the Laundrymen with us.
But since we've last spoke, though, you've done other works, not just the Laundrymen, right? Like, I know you're always pushing yourself as an amazing writer here in itself, but what have you done since we've last spoke?
Since we last spoke, my creator-owned book, Hero Man, released in early 2024 with artist Zach Schuster, who did the colors in our backup story for Laundryman Volume 1. And he's actually doing a 6-page short at the end of Laundryman Book 2 surrounding the Raph, the werewolf character that we introduced in the book. So that came out in early 2024, and we traveled actually to Angoulême in France, the international festival there, to promote the book as part of the Canadian delegation, and that was amazing. Last year, I was lucky enough to pitch and be accepted and write a story in the DC Comics Halloween anthology, Satanic Panic, in which I wrote the titular character's story, Zatanna, right at the front of the book. And on top of my writing, I letter books also. I've been very lucky. Last year, I lettered a book called Death Fight Forever for Andrew MacLean of Headlopper. And that book is actually going to be published with Image. The first issue will actually be coming out later this month on February 18th. And for those who go and pick up an issue of issue 1 of that book, we actually are running a Laundrymen ad in that book while our Kickstarter is running, but also to talk about some of the big plans that we have coming for that series later this year. Yeah, so it's been really busy. Stephen and I also put out another book in the time since we last spoke called There Was Another Life. It's part 1 of 2. It's a sort of dystopian sci-fi. I call it The Last of Us meets Old Man Obi-Wan Kenobi. So Stephen and I have been busy, as well as working on the Laundrymen and all these other sorts of projects that we've had going on.
Just means I got to get you both back on to talk about your other works, not just the Laundrymen now. Like,
we're here, We're here. We love talking about what's been going on.
Talk about being inside that DC world for a second here, because that's usually a professional entity that not many people get to touch on. What did working inside that machine teach you, good or bad, that you couldn't have learned working on the Laundrymen?
Working inside the DC machine it's something that I'm not gonna say anyone, it's something that I have dreamed of for a number of years. When I look back on that piece, which is my first ever DC writing credit, I'm always amazed by how fast it felt like it happened, even though I'd been trying to find that opportunity for a number of years, and I had been in touch with editors at DC Comics for a number of years. When the opportunity finally arrived in my inbox, it felt like from there everything happened at warp speed. I submitted 10 pitches and one was accepted. And then I wrote the script within 2 weeks, a week and a half. And then I sent it off to storied comics artist John McCrae. John has forgotten more about comics than I'm ever going to learn. And so when I sent my script off to him, it was very much with the caveat of like, John, this is what's in my head, but you're gonna come up with something cooler than I can imagine. Please feel empowered to do that. Like, throw away my script if you want to. I will make it work after. It's amazing when it happens and how smooth from the inside it actually was. Everything ran on time. There were no delays. I was just trying to get out of the way, it felt like, and make this as easy as possible for everyone I was working with. But it's also incredible how quickly it goes by. The book hit stands in September. It was really exciting talking to everyone in the comics sphere for like a week, and then the next Wednesday rolls around, and there are new books out, and there's something else to talk about now. So it's amazing how quickly it comes and then it goes. It was a dream come true, and I'd love to do it again.
Got to be amazing working in that world here, especially writing for Zatanna specifically. Did that change the way you were thinking about your own indie characters and their voices compared to, say, something that's well established?
Yeah, I mean, it really makes you, or made me, reconsider the way that I build my stories, especially when you're dealing with a short comic in the DC universe. Like, things have to happen and they need to be meaningful, and you have to tell your story, and you have to both respect the history of the character while also bringing yourself to it. When I started on the story, I did a lot of background reading on Zatanna's more recent work and tried to find a story in there that resonated with me and something that I could bring my voice to. But when I think about my own indie work, I think that, there's a certain necessity when you're building a story in the indie space that you have to set things up in the way that you don't have to in a shared universe or an existing character. But I really think it imparted in me this need to get everything set up quickly and get right into the story and not worry about, overloading the reader too soon. I think there's a good balancing act there. I think that also really fits into that ethos we've been talking about how stories right now they have to strike a chord in the reader more than ever before right now if you're going to create something that lasts.
I've seen the same thing when you're trying to tell a story in short reels and short content from, like, even based off of interviews that I've done.
Totally.
It can get to the point where it's like you have a 3 minute conversation or a 3 minute clip you're editing down to 30 seconds. How much of that message gets lost when it comes to what you're trying to convey in that short attention span window that we have, whether it's in a comic or whether it's, visually on your phone.
Totally. Yeah.
Besides what you worked on in DC and with the Laundrymen and everything else you just mentioned, do you find that you have to mentally switch between the writer portion of you and the promotion portion of you and whatever other hats?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kurt, I'm sure you know exactly what it's like having to flip between all of those hats. Steven and I are equals in, I've always aspired to be equal to him in our creative partnership because making art is so much work and is so time intensive. in the time since we last spoke. Steven's become a dad, and there's so much that goes into that also. So I really try to take it upon myself to make his life as easy as I can. So, when I'm doing the writing and then I'm doing the Kickstarter setup and I'm, liaisoning with printers and with different publishers and editors and trying to continue to help both of our careers to grow. There's like writer Lyndon, and then there's marketer Lyndon, and then there's like me in a hoodie with my hood up, just trying to get the book laid out in time to make the print deadline. It's a real balancing act, but I think, I've been working on this theory that there, at some point in history, it was possible to make a project and let the work stand on its own, and that's not the world we live in anymore. Now, if you're going to be a creative, you have to make the work and then you have to figure out how to get that work into everyone's hands. And also, you need to be willing to talk about yourself and promote yourself. If you're not able to do that, I think you're going to have a really tough time in any creative space because things are so fractured now and people get their media from so many different locations that there isn't really a marketing machine anymore that can rev up and push any singular work at anyone. I was teaching a course this week in creative writing, and one of the questions I had for them was, what are the major media properties that you enjoyed growing up? These are students who are a decade younger than I am. What I was shocked to hear was that a lot of the main properties that they had growing up were the same ones that I had growing up. And that sort of disappointed me because I remember the thrill of the latest big movie coming out and, lining up at movie theaters and book launches and all of these things. There's something really special about being there when this thing is coming out. And I think we still see that to a degree in comics, fortunately. But in the more multimedia space, it's kind of lame that there's no big cultural excitement thing going on. For a while we had Avengers, but I think we know what that's looked like in the last couple of years. And they keep trying to do that with various things, but nothing's working. I don't know how I got on this topic, but the whole idea that of having to do a little bit of everything is, I think, a fundamental part of being a creative in the modern era, especially.
But it's not an easy process either because everything changes so rapidly. Looking at social media and how to promote on that, just in the last 3 years alone, it's changed from, oh, you have to post a short every time and hashtags were a good thing. And now it's like, well, Instagram wants you to post 12 reels a day or 12 reels a month or whatever they've arbitrarily set these days. And it's just like, I don't have that much time to do all that stuff.
And it's exhausting.
It is.
Like, I can only imagine what that's like for you. I feel like on a certain respect, I've retreated from social media in the same way that I used it 3 years ago when we were talking. And there used to be a robust comics network on, I think it was still then Twitter. It was more of a community than it is now. But now I don't know how social media works anymore. So I can only imagine for you, Kurt, what it's like having this platform, this podcast, and I'm sure how you reach your audience has completely shifted and continues to shift all the time.
If there's something that I have in an interview, if there's a question or an answer like what we're going to have here today, that just sparks a creative idea. It's like, okay, I'm going to highlight that when I'm editing it, and that would become a short reel of some kind. That's how I kind of figure out the best way to promote the content from these amazing interviews like I have with you here today. But it's still only going to get 1,000 views at most if I'm lucky, and that just depends on how I edit. But it's still your message. It's still what you're saying. That's, I think, a valid point in whatever question I highlight or whatever question I post online. But I put it out there for the masses to see, and that's why I love these still long format interviews, because then it's like now we're diving into the nooks and crannies of what makes you a creative person and what you're actually trying to promote. And you're definitely not a hard person to speak to when it comes to promotion of your own comics. So it works out very well in that respect.
Hey, I'm here for it. I'm here to talk about this. I run in a circle of people, and we like to say that if you can't talk about your own work, who's going to talk about it? And I think that's going to stay true for a long time now, the way things are going.
It's also very difficult for a lot of people that are maybe more introverted than say yourself. And I'm like half introverted. I'm like, 50-50 when it comes to introvert extrovert diagram there. If you had to explain the state of comics in
Yep.
2026 to a smart outsider, what's the one thing they'd find most surprising about how this industry works?
Ooh, that's a really good question. If I was trying to explain it, so I'm trying to imagine if I was explaining this to like my grandparents about how the comics industry works, and it's that the popular conception of comics here in North America is that there are only superhero comics and some other stuff. But I have traveled and I lived in France for a year, so I immersed myself there in the Franco-Belgian comics community culture, and I was exposed to comics that are about literally anything. And the way that comics are able to communicate ideas in way and are marketed towards adults in ways that we don't normally do here in North America. We're just starting to. And I almost think that that's out of a necessity because now comics are starting to compete with manga here, which is so popular that the comics landscape is rapidly evolving while also trying to find ways to reinvent the things that have always been popular. When we talk about like DC and the Absolute line or Marvel and the Ultimates line, those are those companies' attempts at refreshing their characters in ways that are more relevant now than they ever have been. And I think in a certain part, they've openly said that some of those comics are heavily inspired by manga style illustration. And I think the culture here is really starting to expand out of the comics are for kids mentality, which you and I, Kurt, know is the reality. Like comics are not for just for kids, they're for everyone. But because they were that way for so long, the common perception of them is that still. And so it's exciting to see how much things are changing on a certain level. We don't know where it's going. That can be a good thing for certain people. That's a terrifying thing because, there are certain people who just want to make comics great again. But I think the more varied the stories we see, the more powerful it is. There will be more ways for people to connect, and the more people that are reading comics, the better, in my opinion.
But you also have to read comics yourself to kind of appreciate the medium of comics or manga, whatever you read, or watch
Totally.
anime, because it's a
Yeah,
multimedia world these days. It's not just go down to your local library and pick up your book and then return it after 7 days. I mean, those
totally.
those are still around. But have you read anything recently that just kind of rewired something in your brain about the craft, about structure and writing, pacing, character development?
I feel like this is such a cliched answer that I'm about to give, but I recently read Assorted Crisis Events from Image, Dennis Camp, and Eric Zawatsky on it. It is truly a book that I cannot imagine being in any medium that isn't comics. Every single issue was a new sort of incredible concept because it's an anthology-like series where they're telling different stories in every issue. I think CBR said it was the best comic of 2025. Like, I'm not the only person who is talking about this book. And that's why it feels cliched, but it's because it's so good. It's so good. And yes, that absolutely rewired my comics brain to look at stories that can only be told in comics because so much, we see it, we've been seeing it for 8 or 12 or 15 years now, so many comics being adapted into movies. I don't know how that book would be adapted into a movie. It is so medium breaking that I can't see it. And that's so refreshing. It's so refreshing to pick up a book and think, this can't be anything else. I'm reading the definitive way of experiencing this story. And I'm so excited to read, every issue that comes out now after sitting and catching up on the first 6 issues in the trade. Like it's just excellent. Excellently done. What about you, Kurt? What have you been reading lately?
Besides Laundrymen book two, not much to be perfectly honest. I haven't had a chance to really read too much because I've been doing more TV and film stuff. So
Mm.
I've been stuck on sets, so I haven't been able to really do too much from a personal perspective. I read on my phone. I read a bunch of like manga and anime and things like that. So I have a huge list of stuff I just kind of flip through. A lot of isekai stuff, a lot of just fantasy, murum, martial arts style stuff. Like I'm all over the place. Whatever kind of catches my eye, so it's fun that way. But you mentioned lettering, and is that something you just started more recently, or it's something you've always done?
So lettering's something that I've always done. It started off with Stephen and I's first book, Infinite Universe, which came out in 2018. For anyone who isn't, in-depthly aware of, in the comics writing process, in the mainstream process, there's typically sort of a machine conveyor belt style construction of comics. The writer writes the script, gives it to the artist, who does the pencils, who gives it to the inker, who inks the page and gives it to the colorist, who colors the page and then gives it to the letterer. In indie comics, it's not that clean. And when Steven and I started our first book, I wrote the script, gave it to him to illustrate, which he penciled, inked, and colored those pages. Once I handed in the script, I sort of sat back and started twiddling my thumbs because what do I do now until the book is done? And I really want, respecting the amount of time that Stephen was putting into that book, decided that I wanted to be a larger contributor to our creative team. And so I decided I was going to learn to letter. And so, I probably lettered that book five, six, seven times while I was learning, but I found a great online course from John Roshel, who runs Comicraft, and it was the rocket fuel that got me started. I've been lettering ever since, and it's been an amazing sort of superpower, hidden superpower in my comics career because it's put me in touch with so many amazing creatives. I mentioned Death Fight Forever with Andrew McLean. I did the preview issue of Arcbound that was written by Frank Thierry and Scott Snyder and Tom Hardy when it previewed at New York Comic Con a number of years ago with Ryan Smallwood on art. And so that was amazing. And comics is a community. You can't avoid that and you need to embrace it, especially if you want to make a living in this career or you want to find a greater group of individuals to connect with. As a writer, it's really hard to do that. But as a letterer, I've been able to connect with so many artists and so many other writers and other comics communities. And it's really allowed me to grow the collaborators that I've had and the friends that I have in this industry. And I've been able to work with people in ways that I would never have been able to do if I was just writing. And, so much of lettering is also graphic design, and I have to learn book layouts. And it's really given me a greater appreciation for everything that goes into making comics and every step of that conveyor belt that we spoke about. And I genuinely think that being a letterer makes you a better writer because you have to visualize and conceptualize the amount of space that you're taking up. And I love being the last set of hands on a page because sometimes the script that I've written has become completely redundant by the art that's being handed to me. And so I can go in and I can cut lines and I can rearrange things and I can mess around with text in ways that you can't necessarily do as a writer. And it was such a, if we're talking about what I learned from working at DC Comics, I didn't letter my own work there. And that was the right decision. We had an amazing letterer, Ariana, on it. It was different. It was actually the first time I'd ever written a comic where I didn't do my own lettering. And so the what's known as the lettering pass, which is sort of the last hurrah that a writer gets to make changes once the art and the first lettering pass are done, was a new experience for me. And it was a lot more limiting than I'm used to in indie comics. So that was an amazing experience, but it also sort of reminded me of the magic power that the letterer has on a project. For all the writers out there, I highly recommend you learn at least the theory of lettering. Give it a try, even if it's not at a professional level. I think it's going to make anyone a better writer. And I was fortunate enough early in my career of lettering and writing to have met Ed Bryson, who wrote and lettered his own stuff for forever, and he was awesome too.
I focus more on TV and film because that's just how my brain works. I enjoy watching and reading and seeing the process of being a creative person like yourself and working with a team and being collaborative. And film is very similar to that, but that can be edited to all hell.
Yeah.
For better or for worse. It really depends on your editor. But when you're scripting Wade and Brian ending up on opposite sides of this vampire alien conflict, what personal questions about loyalty, morality, or picking a side are you really poking at?
Oh, that's how long do we have here for this? No. When I am scripting those two on the opposite sides, the fun thing about the Laundrymen is that they exist in what's sort of a morally gray area. They are not government workers. They are mercenaries for hire, but the characters themselves seem to have a moral compass, which is great. When I am talking about those two ending up on opposite sides and having to deal with the morality questions that go along with helping aliens or vampires, their first and ultimate goal is to help one another because they are friends and we help our friends. And then it comes down to the larger scope. In The Laundryman, Blood of the Saucerman, Brian is kidnapped by the mob who turn out to be aliens. And he thinks that the mob is bad because our perception of the mob is bad. But these aliens are under siege from vampires. This whole concept is so schlocky that the reader, the viewer just has to stick with me here for a minute. But the aliens hire him for a job, and Brian hates vampires for some mysterious reason that we explore throughout the book. It is a paying job. It's against a bigger enemy of his, so he takes the job. That's his moral compass in that situation. Wade, on the other hand, aligns himself with an organization who is more openly sort of dark and shadowy and evil looking, and those are vampires. And he does that because they seem to be his only path to finding his friend. He, on a certain level, compromises those values in the name of helping someone that he cares about. I look at that as something that is morally gray in a sense, but also morally right. I think what that book was for me on that sort of existential level was asking the question of how far would we go to help our friends? And everyone's answer to that is going to be different. But when it came from me personally, the people who are there for you are there for you. And we have to reciprocate that as people, or else we're not building community. Something my wife and I often say, and this is a much smaller scale than what Brian and Wade have to deal with, but the idea that to build a community means to experience inconvenience. And if we are not willing to inconvenience ourselves on occasion, we will end up alone in our homes scrolling short form videos until the end of time.
I feel seen a little bit on that last comment, but I'm just saying.
I'm not, it wasn't an attack,
Oh,
Kurt.
no,
I
no.
support you. Your short form videos aren't trying to melt my brain.
Oh, but no, that's very valid because I mean, we all have a group of friends, whether there are significant others or whether there are longtime friends we had for 20 plus years or whatever, whether you met them through gaming or whether you met them through whatever, that you always kind of gravitate back towards, whether you've been separated for 5, 10, 15 years or whatever. You kind of reconnect at your local Jose's or whatever it is and have a beer and kind of reminisce about the old days. But
Totally.
but it's good to see that you're able to take real life experiences from the morality side of things and put them into your work because that shows authenticity when it comes to being a writer.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think if you can't put yourself into your writing, what are you doing?
Yeah. It's that creative bug.
Right.
that we all have, whether whatever medium we're working in. And I kind of figured that out when I went back to school for visual arts and film. I had to learn to be creative from a fine art perspective, as well as photography, as well as TV and film as a producer. But you're working with so many different egos and personalities, that how do you filter through to make the one ultimate product you can
Totally.
to get it out to the masses, whether it's a cable access show that you had to stay up till 3 in the morning to edit, or in your case, creating an amazing comic for the masses to read. Like,
Oh,
we just got to get it out there for people to see.
yeah, absolutely.
I'm just
Yeah, I
trying to
couldn't
give you
have said
more
that
pull
better.
quotes for your second book. I'm just
You're
saying.
trying to do this a second time. You're trying to get
Exactly.
back in there again. Yeah.
Because I haven't screenshotted that entire the first pull quote from book two that I saw on page two, by the way. I haven't screenshot and put that on my background whatsoever. No, it's
Oh, you definitely should. You definitely should. You're, by all means, please do. It was a great quote.
you opted for a conversational approach this time around, which is great. I don't mind it whatsoever, because it's free flowing, it's easy to go by, and it honestly makes editing a whole lot easier because I don't have to edit. But does that actually help you sharpen your thinking about your work and about your comics in general when it comes to this type of conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if I'm talking too much at you, Kurt, I expect that you're gonna push back on me a little bit more. But as we said, to promote your work or to make something in the creative space, you need to promote your work as much as possible. And what I've found in the past is a lot of the questions end up being very similar when you're talking to someone for the first time. And so there's nothing wrong with that. It's a lot of how did you get started in comics? What are the first comics you ever read? How do you find your inspiration? We have spoken before, and I think we had a lot of those questions. And so when I wanted to come back and talk about the next book, I wanted to talk more to Kurt the person than Kurt the interviewer. I find that the questions and the thoughts, the conversation that comes up, it's so much more organic and so much more thoughtful than the sort of canned responses that I think is easy to fall into in those question and answer interviews. And so, yes, absolutely. Everything you said is true about it, but I think those make for the best conversations. And more importantly, for a listener or a viewer, I really hope I'm going to talk outside of me now because I'm awful at like pumping my own tires. But this idea that you really hope that when you listen to real conversations, that the viewer, the listener, sees that they are talking to another person, or sees that they're listening to another person and finds a way to feel recognized, because that's all we're doing when we're making things, right? Is we're just I'm putting something out in the world and I'm saying, I hope you can see me and I hope you feel seen in this. And I think that's really what I don't know who I'm paraphrasing. I'm definitely paraphrasing someone when I say this, but isn't that what art is? It's being seen and trying to see other people.
Just like any conversation you have with anyone, you're trying to connect to a person in some way, shape, or form. And how you connect with that person is usually through a common bond or a common interest of something. In this case, it's comics, or it could be a
Yeah.
TV show, it could be a movie, it could be a favorite comedian, or whatever the case may be. But you've made that attempt to connect with someone, no matter how small it is, no matter what art you create, no matter who sees what you created. You're touching someone in some way, shape, or form from a creative aspect. Take a wander around your local art gallery, and you're going to see not just the masters, but it's going to be amazing to see what speaks to you. Like, I went to the Detroit Institute of the Arts. I saw a Van Gogh up close. The paint still looked wet, and it's hundreds of years old. Could be just a trick of the lighting, but still.
I was going to say last year, Kurt, you said you're a film guy. Last year, I watched the movie Before Sunrise for the first time ever, and I felt seen in that movie. This is a movie that came out in the 90s, like I think like the mid 90s. I was maybe 3 years old at that time, but to have the sensibilities of that storytelling speak or to cut so deeply through everything else, it was I don't have words. It was what I needed to see exist because it showed that there are other people who feel the way that I do.
If you can do that every time you create something, though, whether it's in whatever medium you're in, because we have such a limited time in this world, why aren't you putting forth your energy and your effort to create something that someone is going to see, whether it's tomorrow or whether it's 10 years from now? Your books and your content is going to be out there. Keep promoting it, keep showing it to the next generation, and maybe it's going to touch them and you've just inspired another generation.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said that better.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation as always here, Lyndon, because you're just such an in-depth person when it comes to when we speak. Because I just love picking your brain. I love seeing the trajectory you're going, and I want to see more of you and Steve as well whenever he gets some time.
I'll tell him.
Tell him I sorely missed. I had questions about his art. I'm gonna have to double up next time he's on.
I'm going to tell him that I was so boring that we needed him to come in and spice things up.
Oh my gosh. Guilt tripped the guy already. I mean,
yeah, exactly. That our interviews are nothing without him, which is not that far off.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. The Kickstarter campaign is currently ongoing. Where can we find it, and how can we support you and Steve and your future works and anything else you'd like to promote?
The book right now, Laundrymen, book 2, Blood of the Saucermen, is live on Kickstarter. You can find that at laundrymen.ca. We're actually selling it and the first book in the series. So anyone who's new can get both if they want, or you can get just the newest one. If you don't have the money to support us at this time, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Sharing the campaign, telling a friend about it, also good, also valid. We give away a free digital comic on our website at infinitestudio.ca often. So that's another way that you can support us. But really, when it comes to the current comics landscape, talking to other people about the things that you like is some of the most important work anyone can do for other creatives. And that's why I hope that anyone who listened to this will go and read Assorted Crisis Events from Image Comics, because it was amazing. If not online, come find Stephen and I at a Canadian comics show. We often do Calgary, we often do Toronto, Winnipeg. In the past, we've been in Montreal, we've been to Saskatoon. But we try and do the major shows. Hopefully, in the near future, we'll be branching out to some of the bigger shows in the US. We have some really big plans for this series that we're not ready to talk about yet, but right now the best way to support us is on Kickstarter at laundrymen.ca.
Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You could, of course, find this interview and 1,200 plus others, because I've literally lost count in the past 18 years. You can, of course, find this interview and, of course, Steve and Lyndon's past interview from 3 years ago on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast you could find at any podcast platform you get the show at by searching 2TWO Geeks Talking. I'm on social media. Find me at Kurt Sasso or at Two Geeks Talking. And of course, as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.